might be taking it a little more collectively than us. Yeah, I was just seeing as how it was progressing. I know. I'm weird. I'm a weirdo.
I see that. Now Nolan does that all the time. He's always writing in the air and doing whatever it is that he's doing that I'm...
It's connecting the dots.
Well, that probably is what he's doing. It's probably exactly what he's doing.
The more I learn about this myself, the more I learn I've got a bit more Temple Grandin in me than I ever realized. And I can see proof of that even in childhood, like the way that I learned and saw things. Like, I was forever making rhymes using mnemonics, whatever. Right? And, of course, having the photographic memory helps. Just look at the page or look at the image and close my eyes, and there it is.
And there it is.
All right, page, flip to that page. Oh, there's the answer right there.
Yeah, that's the answer
for the test. Which is why I couldn't sew my work.
Well, I did when it came to math and it was time to show my work. I'm like, but I just know what the answer is.
Right. And here's another thing that's interesting. How is it that I can have a photographic memory, but I can't visualize for shit when I'm in meditation?
That I don't know.
That makes no sense.
I don't know that. Right? I've got, girl, my world is so well defined.
Isn't it Technicolor?
Oh, man. I tell you what.
It's a smell-o-vision.
I see detail and color and, I've always thought that if there was ever a way that I could put what I see on paper.
Well, maybe you should get yourself an art kit.
I wouldn't should on
you, but you hate to draw?
I don't. And yes, if I practice, it would get better.
Right.
My hands, I don't like it. I just want to will it out there. The physical manifest, I find no pleasure in it.
Well, we have got to work on this telepathy. People wake up and open up to the television that is in our inner vision.
That's right.
And speaking of details, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Sonia Lee.
And I'm Piper Lynn. We want to welcome you to In My Experience podcast.
And as usual, we're prepping, thinking about we're going to talk more about what we talked about last week, which was on
identity.
Identity, thank you.
Identity crisis, identity,
right.
Yes. Who are you? Who am I?
And, and that leads us to all kinds of other interesting topics. But what you identify with, how you identify, those are all, do you know your own identity?
Right.
Like, do you know who you are?
It's interesting. I have been putting my toe into human design. Someone else brought it up with me.
Yeah.
And there are still some things that really don't resonate with me. But, I am willing and playing, I guess. I'm doing a little study using myself. Mm-hmm. And they have, in human design, they have open centers. Mm-hmm. And how they describe them is they come in unidentified.
Yes.
And so those are the places where you take on other people's stuff.
Yes. Or another person comes in and completes you.
Okay.
So it's like plugging into each other.
Mm-hmm.
You have my missing, and that happens too. If like you only have half a gate or, something like that,
mm-hmm.
then someone else comes in, and what they bring to you makes a complete circuit, and then that enables you to be able to utilize that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There's so much to it, and you're right. There are some things where I'm like, I don't know if I understand that. I don't know if that makes sense to me.
Right.
And I'm still struggling with astrology, and this encompasses a lot of that astrology, I Ching. There's a lot of different chakras, all of that comes into this.
So, but anyway, this conversation isn't about that. But it's interesting, the thought that we come into this life with things that we do know about ourselves.
Yes.
And things that we don't.
Yes.
And so where do we find our identity in those things that we don't know about ourselves?
Yeah. How do we find that?
Yeah, how do we form it? How's it formed?
Yeah. And, I was just thinking as you were saying about, a lot of times people say, I don't know, right? You'll ask them a question about something and they'll be like, gee, I don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just made me think of our instructor that we had at Sweha, where she would do something and she'd say, you know, well, do you like peppermint ice cream? And they'd go, oh, God, no. Well, you know that, right? And I just love that so much.
Right.
Like, I use that a lot of times. When somebody be like, I don't know. I'm like, well, do you like salted caramel ice cream? And they're like, what? Ice cream. Do you like salted caramel ice cream? Yeah, I guess. Well, you know that. And then you see them, they stop, and they go, because I feel like in that moment, it's either you haven't taken the time to think about that, right? Like pause. Don't be so quick to respond. Let me give a minute. Let it ruminate in your brain. Maybe you do know.
Right.
And then, as we were talking before we started, there's that whole phenomenon that's called being an empath. And when you're a really hardcore empath, right? Like, literally, you're searching on Zillow, and then all of a sudden you remove the boundaries. Yeah, that's an empath. And I can remember, for a very large portion of my life where somebody would say, I think I want to go back to school and, learn about, I don't know, how to be a birth doula. And I'd be like, oh, that sounds fantastic. Yeah. Oh, I think I want to do that too. And it wasn't because I was wanting to copy or emulate them. It was because I could feel how exciting that felt to them. And me not having any boundaries, it felt right within me.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many things I started and then realized, no, I don't want to do this. I wanted to be a motivational speaker like Wayne Dyer. Like, I sat and listened to that man for 4 hours one night at a Celebrate Your Life event. And I was just like captivated. And then when it was over, he went and signed books for an hour. And I thought, oh, God, no, I don't want to do that. Like, you actually have to talk to the people one-on-one after you talk to them for 4 hours? No, I don't think I want to be a motivational speaker that sells books. But that other part sounded really cool.
Yeah.
And so part of my process of awakening was learning to really be, not be so subjective, or maybe be a little more objective in looking at what, and it's like, I can appreciate art and beauty. I'm not very good at actually creating art, right? Like, I'm a stick figure kind of drawer. But I can see the beauty in it. I can see the beauty in artistry in a lot of things. That doesn't mean that I'm an artist, like you just said at the beginning, right?
Absolutely.
You've got this great visualization picture in your brain. And I will say to you that you do bring it out very well in your yoga nidra and your meditations. You do provide a good visualization for people.
Well, that's good.
You just can't do it by hand.
No.
It's an oral rendering.
I could accept being that kind of artist.
Right? And that's sort of the thing, that the process that you go through in, trying to identify who you are.
Right.
What you like. Why do you like it?
Right.
And is it something that is coming from within you or coming from outside of you?
Right.
Right? I also think about situations where people will make decisions and determinations on something without actually having tried it. And one of the ways that I used to breach people's boundaries was by I don't want to say being pushy, but in some cases I was pushy, but just sort of like, no, try it. Just try it, And sometimes they would be like, oh, that's surprising. That's better than I thought. And then other times they'd be like, yeah, no, I don't like that. And I'm like, okay. But for me, I was always of that mindset, but how can you really know whether or not you like something if you've not tried it or experienced it or tasted it or visited it, right? You don't have enough information to be able to make this determination.
Right.
Yeah, who am I to get to say that you don't have enough right? So that brings us to boundaries too, right?
Right.
Because one of the things that comes about through self-identity is a deeper understanding of your boundaries, or lack thereof.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, how can you create a boundary when you don't know what, who, where you are? So your ability or inability to see what, who, or where anyone else is, there's no line of demarcation. There's no separation. And the thing is, when it comes to those things, because everything is a process. We have to go through something to get to another level of awareness. It's just what it is.
Yes.
That's how we evolve.
Yes.
So, the conversation, because I've had this conversation with my clients, I often get clients who see themselves as wanting to be spiritually evolved, and that is their goal. That is to be awake to, and it's beautiful. It's amazing. I resonate with that. But like the conversation of boundaries, where we're all one. Yes, that is true. We are all one, absolutely. But to try to jump to we are all one and bypass the fact that here now in this moment there are separations and there are boundaries because you are here in human form and that's how it works.
Right.
You can't do that.
No.
You're just trying to, once again, bypass the pain or discomfort or the work of figuring out what your boundaries are and then having to do something about them.
Correct.
So we are all one, 100%. But I need to know, within that all one, I need to know who Piper Lynn is so that then I can decide what I want to do with that.
Right.
Right? When I have my boundaries, I can change them to whatever I want, whenever I want.
Sure.
So.
And that's your prerogative to do so.
Absolutely. Once I have the knowledge. Yes.
And only yours.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's like you say, we are all one. We're all the ocean, but we're an individual drop. You don't get out of the water and take the water with you. Right? You might have a few droplets attached to you, but you don't take the water with you. And I also think about when people say we're all one, from a spiritual perspective, I do agree with that. But absolutely from a physical perspective, I rebel against it. Right? Because I don't want to be part of a group all the time. I don't want to be part of the community most of the time, right? You don't get to touch my body without my permission. Right? So when someone says it and takes it as literally, we're all one, everything is one, everything is unity. No.
Not here, not now.
Not in the
That's
the whole reason we come here.
Right.
Is to be separate and sovereign individuals, to see
and experience it.
Right. What's it like to fly solo?
Right.
Are you flying solo? Huh?
Oh, I often am, yes.
Right? And in your identity, are you flying solo? And this is a thing, we talked about this last week, right? I identified as a mother. That's not flying solo.
No.
That's having little ducklings underneath my wing, right? And, working for myself. I'm self-employed. I'm my own boss. I'm my own employee. I'm my own sole proprietor. And I serve the public. So, yes, I can say I can refuse service to whatever, whomever, but at the same time, I recognize, especially in real estate, I have a fiduciary responsibility to put another person's needs as it relates to real estate before my own. So that doesn't make me autonomous. Right? So all of these experiences that I've had has helped me, working in the hospital, patient confidentiality, all these things have sort of forced me to learn to develop some boundaries. So that I don't disclose someone's private medical history, so that I don't disclose someone's private financial, or I don't insist that someone buy a house that they hate, but it's a good price and it's in your neighborhood, so you will buy this house whether you like it or not, because I found it for you. See what I'm saying? Like, we can take these to, and we often do, extremes.
Absolutely. And the the interesting thing with boundaries, because if we come in as Sonia was saying, open areas, which empaths are. I mean, I think everyone is open in certain areas or at certain times,
Sure.
but empaths are like all over the place.
Right.
And I speak from experience
Yep.
for that. So,
and we'll talk about the purpose of being an empath.
right, absolutely. There are reasons it is not a curse. I see that often, and it makes me sad. It's not a curse.
It is the gift and the grace.
You haven't, whoever's saying it is a curse haven't learned to work with it yet.
Correct.
I'm not saying it's easy. There's some really hard things about it.
Especially right now.
Yeah.
With all this energy.
So the whole, what is me, what is not me, what is you, what is not you. What my personal journey has brought me this week is the clarity that we can have beliefs about our own individualness that we didn't know that we had.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. I mean, I've always said that you can believe anything, whether you want to or not.
Right.
Right? You can, and I use the example of, you grew up maybe in a very unhealthy home and you learned that you were ugly or stupid,
Right.
So you can end up believing that even though you don't want to believe it.
Sure.
And so there's work to do to get around that, or get through that, basically. But so that can even be true with someone who has done the work, that there are still things that you learn about yourself that you didn't. You're like, oh, I mean, we are amazing.
Oh, and
We
our
are
capacity to evolve,
right?
and persevere, and the resiliency,
The complexity,
yeah,
the complexity that is there is amazing.
So my son graduated on Thursday. Thank you, Jesus. I really mean that. Thank you. And that was one of the things that they talked about in the commencement, was the resiliency of these students for the last 16 months. And it really was, because as juniors in March, when this whole, funky business began, they watched a lot of their friends not get to experience that. I mean, and it really is sad. We really need to do something for the class of 2020. I'm just saying. Let's rent out a football stadium or something, because I agree, and I read an article about that, where it really, we really need to do something for the class of 2020. They got the rawest of raw deals, collectively speaking.
Right.
And while some people may not think going through a graduation is a big deal, it is the rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. Even if you didn't graduate yourself, go back to that period of time, and if you didn't, you had an experience around that. It could have been disappointment, it could have been indifference, it could have been anger, whatever. The fact that you didn't or did not graduate impacted you. The same is true for them, and this was completely without their choice.
Right. Yeah, I was just saying yesterday, because I'm always interested in generations. Like, that's just an interest of mine. And so I was talking to my mom yesterday, and I'm like, I think because they talk about micro generations within the generation.
Yes.
I'm like, I honestly believe that those who graduated in 2020 and 2021,
Right.
because for so many students, 2021 still wasn't normal. Or it wasn't normal, though they did maybe actually get acknowledgement of their graduation.
Right.
Those 2 years need to be their own micro graduation, because I guarantee you something about that formed, and I don't claim to know what it is yet, but those 2 years who experienced that formed their identity. Yeah. Now, all children, everyone who experienced the past 2 years
has had their identity.
Right. Has their identity changed in some way.
Yeah. There is absolutely, I always ask forever for a Greek Jubilee, right, where we do a reset, and I guess that was as close as we could get to one. And you are right, and I totally agree with you on that. And maybe it's about breaking down of that tradition.
It could be.
I mean, I don't know, but
right.
And it is not inherently a Western tradition, but I would call it a more of a first world, right? Because I'm sure that there are some other countries where there isn't even a traditional K through 12 school system, right? And you think about, certain, tribes around the country and thing where they teach a different type of education than, than school. And the other thing that they were talking about with this resiliency of the class of 2021 was after seeing what happened in 2020, then going into school and having it be online. And for a lot of these kids, online just does not work for a lot of different reasons. Right. It could be a learning thing. It could be a social thing.
There was no
It could be an emotional.
With my son. He could not do it.
No, and my son struggled really hard with it too, as did several of his classmates. And that was one of the things that we found out was that it was an absolute nail biter. There were 36 kids that graduated because it's a very small school he went to, and the director said it was a nail biter for a lot of those kids to actually get them to graduation because of their struggles and because of their sense of defeatedness. Yeah, what's the point of doing this? And so it is really hard to pull yourself up and see something through when
there's absolutely no reason to do it. I mean, come on, seriously. And that's true for everyone. If you're going through a very painful, difficult, challenging situation, what the fuck is the reason to continue to do it if it's not going to end, if there isn't a good thing on the other side, if there isn't somewhere that you can next go to? I mean, yeah.
And that's your ability to be able to identify a purpose, a goal, an outcome. And, so this is about identity.
Absolutely.
They thought their identity was to be a high school senior. And then they said, well, this looks nothing like a high school senior like I thought it would be. So what do I care?
What do I do with it?
And all of the pressure from, and again, have to give it to the administrators. And that was the other thing, too, because I was a little irritated with the way some of the things were done at the school. But I also saw and recognized at that commencement, because they spoke to it, all these teachers had a learning curve, too.
Oh, unbelievably so.
To try to figure out how to do this. And, this is a performing arts school. How do you take visual and performing arts and teach it and then showcase it? I mean, they did it. They did a phenomenal job. Resilient. We don't know. We're probably not going to do it right. But by God, we're going to find a way. We're not going to give up on this. And I think if there was one thing that the class of 2021 got, it was that we're not going to give up. And again, apologies to the class of 2020. It took us by surprise. We only had 2 months, 6 weeks. We didn't have time to react. That's why I think we owe them a do-over. But by 2021, it wasn't pretty, but it was done. I saw fireworks going off all over this valley. And the only time that happens before the 4th of July in Arizona, because we are a dry state, is because somebody's graduated.
Gotcha.
And so they made it work. They made it happen. And it created a new way for everyone to identify what was important, right? Like, only 4 people could attend. Now, that was hard for his brothers to not be able to see him graduate. But only 4 people could attend, right? Because we had to have certain restrictions in place. And so, we had to identify new ways to make this work. And we're still doing that in everything, right? We're seeing this out in the world as we're trying to figure out how we live life moving forward. Do you notice how I didn't say a new normal? Because I think normal is an identity that is falling away. Which is great for the freaks. Woo!
Yes. Yes, I remember, I think when I graduated, my mom got a bumper sticker for me that said, "Why be normal?" Because I never got that. But yeah, so now we're talking about not just personal identity, right? So we talked a lot about that last week. But now we're talking about cultural identity, social identity,
intellectual.
And so we're getting into larger, because we're all a part of that, whether we actively think about it, whether we actively do something about it, we're all a part of that larger.
Sure. You cannot be a
identity.
participant. You may still be a witness.
Yeah.
Right? And we talk all the time about how, you can't unsee something.
Right.
So,
true.
And then the boundaries that are being drafted through all of this. And again, we can see that in everything too, right? As we are shifting our identities, we're also shifting our boundaries. I mean, that can be political. We're seeing a lot of that going on. We're not even going to talk about that.
No. We'll just mention that, yes, it is happening.
Right. Scholastically, right? Like we know here in Arizona, and again, it's our experience, so we speak to what we're experiencing and seeing and knowing.
We know, yes.
But there are actually schools that are closing down, elementary schools, because they don't have enough students or teachers for them. And so now we are having to expand those boundaries, and now kids are having to be bused more, and we all know none of those things are really great. But what we're also seeing is that there's a lot of parents that are choosing to take their education dollars and invest them in private, charter, or even homeschooling, right? Like for some people, their decision on how to handle this situation and keep their kids safe, and it's so funny because, again, going out and looking at homes, I can't tell you how many classrooms I am seeing in people's houses now.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And I can guarantee you those parents never identified as an educator when they had those children.
Right.
They were caregivers.
Right.
And the other one that made me think about it was, we have a lot of restaurants here because we're very much a tourist state. And while we are getting into the summer months, so we're not seeing quite the influx. I mean, at any given time, we can have 400,000 people in a city here that are just here for the weekend.
Right.
And when you have that increase in numbers of people, like take Tempe, for example, you got the Fiesta Bowl going on, and there's 500,000 people that show and descend on your town.
Right.
You're going to have more accidents. You're going to have more assaults. You're going to have more, people eating in restaurants. You're going to have more people staying in hotels. You're going to have more people on the roads. So we live and breathe this, right? And we know it's cyclic or seasonal, but it's something that is usual for us. What is unusual, and I mean at just a huge level, is that they've got all of these positions in these hotels, in these restaurants, in these event centers that they cannot find people to work.
Right. And you know what? I mean, we have less people than we did last year, right?
Yes.
Literally, we have less people. But that's not what this is.
No.
This is people refusing to do the work that they used to do, either because of pay, because of environment, because of health, or all of them and more.
Sure, because you are risking yourself to every kind of person that crosses the state line.
Right.
And you have no idea what their condition. Are they healthy? Are they unhealthy? Like we said, there's the financial component to it, and I want to say on an aside, it's been my observation that while there's been a lot of talk about the fact, well, why would anyone want to work when they can get money? Specifically here in Arizona, our state has not been as forthcoming with that government funding to our unemployment. So $240 a week is not an inducement for someone to not work a job.
Right.
But exposing themselves to risk. Having less people come in to eat, which means you're working a shift for $275 an hour and you're not making $100 a night in tips.
Right.
And why am I killing myself lifting heavy trays of food, cleaning up after nasty people, and dealing with rude assholes? And again, that's part and parcel of what this is. That's about creating a new boundary for yourself.
Right.
One that was forced upon you. Now, if you could have asked any of these people in 2019, would they have given up their job? And I know this because I know people that work in the restaurant industry. My first husband was in food service management. They like the hours. They like the cash every day. And it's a hard job, but it works for them.
Right.
But when it doesn't work for them, it's terrifying.
There's no reason to, if it doesn't work for your lifestyle, for, whatever it is that you've got going on personally for you, if it does, there is no reason to do it.
Right.
And, unless you do it because you're starving.
Right. And there are a lot, they're paying $15 an hour at Wendy's, for heaven's sake.
Yeah.
Right? And then all you have to do is just stand there and work a machine. But I think that was forcing a lot of people to look at life through a different lens.
Right.
And I know for myself and for a lot of other people too that were self-employed, making lemonade out of the lemons, right? So everything's closed up. Nobody wants you in your home. How are you going to make a living doing the job that you do, right? And so, Matterport became the rage all of a sudden. Everybody's doing virtual tours of their homes for people, so that because people still need to move. It's a constant. People still needed to go to the hospital.
Right.
But you couldn't have family there with you.
Right.
Right? So, and that created a lot of people. A lot of people held off on getting their health checked because of the fact that they didn't want to go into a facility, or they didn't want to go into a facility by themselves. So all that we've experienced here in the last, 16, 18 months has really given us, well, I guess it's not quite been that long. It's probably only been about 14 months, maybe 16. I don't know. In any event, has really given us some new ways to identify ourselves, our lives, our fears, our resiliency, our resources, our sense of community. I've seen a lot, just like in 9/11. That's when Meetup was formed. Two guys in New York wanted to have a way for people to come together that were like-minded and connect, and they created the meetup.com. I'm seeing this on Facebook. There are lots of groups that are very specific to communities, to certain industries or interests. Man, the astrology groups that popped up. I think I'm a member of 5 now, and for the longest time I only had 2. Because we're re-identifying ourselves.
Right.
And we're also re-identifying our boundaries. Right? And that's hard for me to judge anybody in that. Like, it's not what I want, and as long as it doesn't, get on my shoes, I can not like it, but I'm not going to say or do anything about it.
Right.
Because it doesn't, I have to ask myself that question: does this really have an effect on me?
Right.
In my world? But I can't begrudge somebody else looking at their life and going, hey, this just doesn't work for me anymore, and I'm going to do something different now.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? And there's another thing I've noticed going around town is how many shops, places that I used to go to, mechanics or insurance agents or whatever, and they've just decided, you know what? It's time for me to retire.
Right.
I'm done.
Right.
Now, would they have done that had this not happened?
Possibly, but there's a good chance that it wasn't on their radar, at least not at that point.
Right.
Yeah, people are choosing to live differently. Absolutely. And redefining who they are, and based off of whatever their experience was in the past 14 months.
Yeah.
Some people had much more positive experiences than others for a number of different reasons. But whether you define your experience as positive or negative, it has changed you. And it may have just caused you to double down on some things.
Right.
Where you're like, no, I know, after going through that, I know that this is me. Like, I'm never going to say never, because if I have to work for someone else again, then I will.
Right.
Because I have to.
Right.
But I can tell you what, that's the the lowest I can get.
A 9 to 5
list.
job's not on your radar.
Oh my God. No.
Even with everything that's happened, you don't feel that sense. I need that sense of security to show up like
no.
that.
I want it even less at this point. I want it even less at this point. But never say never. It comes up. I do what I need to do to take care of myself and my son.
Correct.
So, but I know that's true for me. That's true for me. And other people will experience it differently. Other people will be like, I have someone who I'm friends with who has done hair for years.
Yeah.
And, and of course this kicked her career into the trash can because she couldn't work for months and months by government choice, and then personal choice. She didn't work. Anyway, she has completely reinvented herself and has found a 9-to-5 job that she loves, that it's easier on her body.
Oh, yeah.
She has, health insurance. She has all those things that working for herself didn't have. So she went the complete other way.
Yeah.
And that's amazing and perfect for her.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for her.
I am too. I think that's beautiful. It made me think about, too, the identities that we work on for ourselves, and then the identity that society wants to put on us as well, and how that's shifting and changing.
Oh, yeah.
And it specifically makes me think about the remote workers. Everyone was forced to work remotely. Everybody had to learn that learning curve. Everybody had to do that, whether they wanted to or not. And I know people that did not. Like they specifically said, I don't do well working at home. I need to be in the office. We need to get back to normal because I'm dying here working at home.
Right.
And now we're beginning to see, and I've heard some people say, where these companies and corporations now are trying to force people to go back into work. Or if they're still working remotely, they're using all sort of time monitors to monitor how much time you're... And it's like they are creating these boundaries for people that are forcing them to look at, do I still identify with this company?
Right.
And so that's sort of more like, not like NAFSA, like an entity or a government, right? Like if you get, an inoculation, then you can travel all over the world. And it's like, but you're forcing me to make a choice that maybe I don't identify with, right? I want to work for this company. I've got tenure. I've got, years put in here. But now you're forcing me to do things that I'm not comfortable with. And it's forcing people to look at their boundaries.
Right. And deciding what they're going to do about that.
What are you going to accept it or are you going to reject it?
Right.
And then what happens after that? And sometimes that force is what's necessary because if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But you knew if it was broke before. I had another person that was, we knew that there was probably going to be a situation where their job was going to be coming to an end. And we had talked about it. And so they were prepared for it, didn't know exactly when. And I got the message earlier this week that they indeed got laid off. And because they were prepared for it, it didn't take them by surprise.
Right.
And actually, they were kind of looking forward to having a little bit of time off with their severance to take care of some things at home. So they were mentally, emotionally ready for that to happen. Their supervisor had an outburst, made a scene on the job, which was also very interesting to my client too. And again, so I get that, knowledge is power. And when you don't know or understand, or you can't see it, or you refuse to see it, then it's going to be more painful for you when it occurs. And the one thing that we've talked about numerously is the only constant is that things are going to change.
Right.
And we are in the boundaryless, changeable, unknowing of life here in the third dimension. And I don't even know. I mean, think about it. We had murder hornets. We had a pandemic. We had all these things. I mean, we don't know what else is coming. There could be an asteroid out there they haven't told us about. Who knows? Cancel. My point is that
those fires in Australia.
The fires in Australia.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, just all of these things are literally pushing us through the funnel.
Yeah.
And extruding from us. What is true for you?
Right.
Who are you truly? And what do you truly want?
When you said that, the difference between your client and your client supervisor, it really hit on something, which is a philosophy that not everyone embraces, but it's Buddhist in nature.
Yes.
right?
Duca.
So the fact that she was laid off,
Yes.
that actual event is just neutral.
Yes.
It's just neutral. And the only thing that makes it not neutral is the response and the feelings and the expectation that we attach to it. And I believe this to be true, and I'm going to say that I believe it to be true in, if I can't say every single action that occurs, I'm going to say pretty damn close to it. And what we choose to do with it and how we choose to respond is what we make of it.
Right.
Is what it is. So the fact that she was laid off is neutral.
Right.
And then we can decide, and maybe we need to decide that it's a negative thing, and maybe we need to decide it's a positive thing, or maybe we don't need to decide anything at all. We can just say,
"It is what it is."
Okay, this happened. So now what do we do?
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway,
no, it's you're so right on that, and talking about the Buddhist thing, right? There will be suffering. Mm-hmm. It's probably your fault. Through your own mental construct is what they mean.
Right, absolutely.
And what are you going to do about it?
Right.
Are you going to hold that space? Are you going to, you're going to clench it with your G.I. Joe grip? Are you going to keep your hand open? Are you going to put your hand in your pocket? What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. Because whatever occurred was outside of your control.
Right.
And the great thing about having self-boundaries and knowing your own identity is the ability to be able to say, this was outside of my control. What can I control in this moment? Do I need to control in this moment?
Right.
Right? And those two questions have nothing to do with the how.
Right.
Because that's none of our business. Well, it is, but it isn't. It's none of our concern. How about that?
There you go.
And so it's really about, the what and the why, not the where and the how.
Yeah.
Right? And so when we talk about identities and we talk about boundaries, we talk about that from a more collective perspective rather than an individual. And again, they are interchangeable. One goes, the right hand and the left hand come together.
Right, right.
And you can have a personal experience that has nothing to do with the collective. There can be a collective experience that has nothing to do with you, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. But when you know who you are in a boat with oars. They might be tucked in the side of the boat, but the oars are there.
Yeah.
You can pull them off and stick them in the little rig and start pedaling or, swimming or whatever you need to do to move into the space that you want to move into. But in order to be able to do that, you have to have some knowledge of, at the very least, where you're at in that moment.
Right. Where you're at and who you are.
So that you can identify what you want to do. And again, we're not going to worry about how you're going to do it.
And that can be really hard, identifying what you're going to do when there are things that seem to be so embraced by larger groups of people, or situations that happen on a much larger scale, and understanding that you have some choice in it.
Yes.
The choice is always, how am I going to choose to respond? Yeah. Whether that's action, whether that's words, whether that's thoughts. And that's how you self-identify.
That's the only how you have control of.
Right.
It's true.
Right.
Yeah. And you have to allow yourself, even if your choices are limited, you can just give up. You can just go into fear. You can go into victimization. And there are a lot of things, institutions are inherently victimizing. Mm-hmm. Governments are inherently victimizing. So in some of these situations, you are limited with what you can do.
Right.
Right? Like, you're not going to be able to change an entire system. Maybe you can.
Maybe you can. Maybe you can't.
Right. But absolutely what you can do is change what you how you're going to respond to it, whether you want to be a part of that or not. Because sometimes you can just say, okay, I don't want to buy into what this system or this government is offering, so I'm going to go my own way and do my own thing, or I'm going to opt out of that.
Right.
You know, so even in the most terrifying situations, if you can stop and connect with your own inner knowing, or in this case we'll call it your own identity, then even in the most limited and restricted of situations, you can still make a decision and a choice.
And it may just be an internal one, honestly.
Right. Like, there's nothing I can do about this, but I refuse to let it feel horrible inside my body.
So I'm going to do something about that. Yes, 100%.
I'm going to pray. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to go walk out in the woods. It doesn't matter. I'm going to turn off all external noises and just be still. And we've seen so many situations, and we're going to see a lot more of these when they lift these moratoriums and we begin to see the house. And I hope not. I mean, my intention that I put out there is that these things will reconcile and find their way. And I know, and a lot of us in real estate know, that there's some dates, hard dates, that are looming out there for where are people at based on the choices that they've made.
Right.
And knowing that there is an end date for this, you're going to have to deal with that one way or another.
Right.
And the thing that for me is concerning is it relates to people's domiciles.
Right. I mean, there's so much talk about living situations and the cost of living and the cost of or living somewhere.
Right.
Right. Having some type of home and all of that, and how this is it's a real valid concern for a lot of people in a lot of different communities as time goes on.
Yeah, and it's gonna. We've not seen the end of that yet.
No.
And again, it also brushes up against, the rights of individuals versus the rights of government. We're already experiencing some of that. There are some people that are in the homes that are grateful for that intervention, but the ones that are paying for those homes, whether it's a bank or a landlord, are feeling like they're not being treated fairly.
Right.
I mean, this is not an easy situation. And that's the other reason I bring this point up. We may be talking with you today, and you may be thinking to yourself, or even saying to the podcast, it's not that easy. We get that.
No, I mean...
Did we say it was easy?
No.
I don't remember you saying it was easy.
No, it is not easy. I mean, I can't tell you how many times in my personal life that I have had to get up and make some type of choice that went against what I would naturally assume to do. Simply because that I had to react differently. I had to respond differently than what I might naturally do. So it's a conscious choice, and it's hard, and that's the training, and that's the self-discipline, and that can be, once again, where I choose to form my identity, is internally within myself based off of the choices that I make in very difficult situations. I think when you were talking about Wayne Dyer once, and I was watching, he was all over PBS, right?
Yes.
Well, he still is,
Yes.
I think. But I was watching him once, and he was talking about asking people to label the top 3 or 4 things that affected their life, that altered their life, like some of the most important things in their life. And he said, he talked about how many people put negative things, things that were done to them, things that they, and he's like, someone hurt you, your husband divorced you, so you are in a situation where you're putting one of the biggest experiences in your life as something negative. He's like, and I'm not saying that there isn't validity to that. He said, but what about those positive experiences? What about those experiences where you reached something, where you made a goal, where you had, he said, so sit down and think about it. And so where we choose to put our focus, now your husband divorcing you could be the worst thing that happened, or it could be the best thing that happened.
Ultimately.
Right?
Yeah.
Your spouse leaving you, you could be like, oh my God. You're like, oh, thank God. And it may take time to get there, but it's all about how you're going to experience it and what you're going to choose to do in response to it.
And it's not, and that is very individualized and comes through exactly what we're talking about here, about identifying, looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Right.
And also, for those that are empaths, recognizing, because I want to go back to that for a minute, recognizing that, yes, this is a gift that we have here, and being able to hold and experience that empathy and compassion for all beings, and also recognizing that we do not have to feel it all the time.
Right.
Right.
And just because we feel it, it doesn't mean we have to act on it either.
Correct. Or take it into our own, and which
Right.
is what most do until you understand that that's what you are, and then you begin to learn boundaries so
Right.
that you don't then identify with everybody else's projection
Right.
of their. I always used to say in my empath class, think of somebody that like washes their hands and then comes out into the room and just shakes the water off their hands all over everybody. Right? That's what it's like for an empath.
Mm-hmm.
When you know and understand and your own identity and your own boundaries, you know what's going on in your energetic bubble, then it really is easier to identify what's going on outside of your bubble, and then be able to choose whether or not you want that in your bubble or not.
Right.
Like, that's the key to being an empath. That's
Right.
your job, is to learn that.
Right.
And then once you have that, like, I can suck up all the air in a room.
Mm-hmm.
I can.
Mm-hmm.
I can also clench my butt cheeks because I don't want to feel all the energy that's in the room, right? It's like, let me just make myself really small and tight here. Well, neither one of those really work for me or anyone else.
Well, I could make myself invisible.
Right.
And so, I mean, I'm still there. I'm still physical. I'm not saying, I was wearing an invisibility cloak.
But I'd like one.
But I could make myself so small that no one saw me.
Yeah.
And my favorite example of that is when I became a flight attendant, I had to go to flight attendant training, and had to fly from Phoenix to Dallas for flight attendant training.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't even know what I ordered. I don't drink tomato juice, so I have no idea why. But I spilled something on myself. I had my khaki shorts on the plane. I spilled something on myself, all right down in front of me in my lap, as you do on an airplane. If you're sitting, you are well aware if you've experienced this.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, fuck. The entire aircraft is full of my classmates. Because that one leg from Phoenix to Dallas connected with everything else, got us there in time when we were supposed to be there. So everyone flying in was basically on that leg.
Right.
So I'm sitting here and I'm like, crap. So of course I have, we used to get cold on aircraft, so I always had a jacket or a sweater. So I took a jacket and sweater and it tied around my waist so that the sleeves covered my place that was all wet.
Right.
And I immediately minimized myself. And the interesting thing is weeks later when we were talking, and I was like, yeah, I was on that flight too. And everyone in the group that I was talking to, like,
You were?
You were? Where were you sitting? I was like, I was right in front.
Right.
They're like, no way. I'm like, yeah, I was there. And I don't think I told anyone about what I did. I don't think anyone would have cared either.
For you.
It was like a big thing because it's new and I don't want to look like I just wet my pants, and no one would believe that. But anyway,
Right.
So that was just as we can expand ourselves, as Sonia said, we can contract. And making myself small and invisible, while it's handy sometimes, is not the way that I want to live.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. It's not what you want to identify yourself as.
No.
And taking up space, right? Like, you have the right to take up space in this world.
Right, absolutely.
Right? You've heard that expression?
Mm-hmm.
Now you understand what it means.
Yes.
Because we all do. And that's another thing that we learned. I know there are so many people that really struggled with the isolation. There were people that were like, well, my life didn't change much. There were people that were like, that was great. It's the first time in my life that I ever sat with myself and I learned so many things. I mean, the whole purpose of it, I think, was exactly that. And I think it was pretty well, for the most part, executed.
Mm-hmm.
What I have seen as to be a struggle is, where do we go from here?
Right.
And I think that we are globally in an identity crisis.
Yes, I would agree. And we're seeing it everywhere.
Yes.
We're seeing it in our societies, in our governments, in our smaller communities, whatever groups we identify with.
And that is around the world. And this is things that you're not hearing on the news.
Right.
But I can tell you, in every community, they are going through this. And they are having to look at it, whether they want to or not. Not looking at it is not an option.
No.
Not doing anything about it is. But I think you can pretty well say not looking at it is not an option, because it's everywhere.
Well, and it's interesting because talking about real estate and the fact that everyone is moving.
Yes.
That is, I mean, especially we're seeing it in the U.S. I don't know if this is a global thing, but definitely in the U.S. because we have so many options.
Right.
We remain in the U.S. and we can choose. We have everything to choose from.
Mm-hmm.
And so moving, right? Getting out of where I have been because I have decided it doesn't fit me anymore. Mm-hmm. And maybe I have the actual opportunity to be where I want to be.
Yes.
Not where I have to be.
Right.
And
or making the decision that it is time to come back to where you were.
Right.
Because I have to now. And there is some of that. But again, that was the choice, and I have seen a lot of people, well, this really made me realize that was more important than this.
Right.
And now I want to be closer to my family. Where before, I left home, I don't ever see Indiana again.
Right.
But now, shift in the thinking.
Yeah, some people are going one way and some people are going another. And it's all based off of whatever their experience was.
Yeah.
During these past 14 months,
and
whatever
who
they decided they are going to be.
Yeah.
Whether it's conscious or unconscious.
Right.
I mean, I'm all for making conscious decisions about your identity, but that doesn't always happen.
Right. Right.
And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just people responding to what is going on and trying to find a place that they feel is better for themselves.
And if you're in a situation where you just feel like, I have no choices, everything's been taken away from me, and I have completely lost my identity, first of all, I send you love.
Yes.
And secondly, be still. It's okay to just be still. Maybe
you can't do anything right now because there needs to be more clarity within yourself. I've been there. I say that from experience.
Yes, 100%.
I say that from experience. I needed to get clearer on things internally within me before I could actually make a choice or a response that worked.
Right. And sometimes it was literally, take a step, wait.
Yeah.
Okay, take another step. Stop. And I mean, maddening, frustrating.
Not easy.
But like the inchworm, like the snail. Centimeter by centimeter.
Right.
I finally got somewhere. And again, not saying this flippantly.
No.
This is not easy for me to say. I only say that with all the unconditional love I have in my heart, because I understand, and she understands what it is to be in that moment, and the terror and the defenselessness and sometimes even the hopelessness.
Right.
She's getting teary-eyed.
Absolutely.
We know what this is like. And just like, you know, sometimes you can't fight and sometimes you can't flee. Right. And all you can do is freeze.
Yeah.
And those are inherent responses within us for a reason.
Right.
They're the three things that save: fight, flight, or freeze. Now, these are not places that you want to live every day. But in times of crisis, those do come to the forefront.
Yes.
And knowing who you are makes you less surprised at how you behave in those moments.
True. True. It makes me think of the Runaway Bride.
Yeah, Julia Roberts,
Yes, where she had a history. I don't know, she ran away from like 3 or 4 different weddings.
And she had George Clooney there, witness and all of it.
And, you know, so it came to the point of you don't even know how you like your eggs.
Yeah.
You are so wrapped up into the identity of the people, in her case specifically, her significant others. Mm-hmm. And then there was some point right before the wedding, repeatedly for her, she was like, wait, that's not me. Even if she wasn't aware that's what she was saying, that's not me. Right. And we do that, and you know what? I think we should honor that. Mm-hmm. We should absolutely honor that. Sometimes we just fall backwards into whatever it is, and we need to do it a couple of times before we get there. And holding that in love and compassion, I think, is extremely important. Not for anyone else. I mean, yes, that's great for other people, but mostly for yourself is what I'm talking about.
Because awareness is key.
Right.
Awareness is key. And so sometimes until you can do that and you recognize it yourself or it's pointed out to you from somebody else, that becomes the start point.
Right.
And then, and you got to get there first.
Right.
So if you feel like your life has been out of control, and for all of us it has, try and allow yourself to look at it through the lens of, okay, all of this is outside of my control. What do I have control of in my life, and only my life, for myself, and how does that make me feel?
Right.
And just the two answers, those two answers will help you to begin to spiral into other thoughts, other considerations, other actions, right? And I think that that's the one thing I know for myself personally. When I have been in a stressful situation, a high-stress situation, the worst thing that I can do is to just react or lash out or go into some sort of hyperdrive mode, when what I really need to do is take a breath, take a knee, and then decide how I want to respond.
Right.
So that is also a crucial part of my new identity on my awakened path.
Right.
So it's not new to this year. I go back a few years.
Right.
But that was the crucial point for me.
Yeah.
I always like it to like, okay, I'm going to anchor here because this is solid ground, and tie the rope around me as I go out and explore, because at least now I know where I'm anchored,
there you go.
Where I'm grounded.
One of the, for me, one of the best philosophies that works for me, and I can't prove it, there's no proving, it just works for me. The best philosophy that I have is that I have a larger intention of continuing my own evolution. I've had that for decades. So it is my belief that those things that occur in my life, even the most painful of things that occur in my life, are somehow moving me towards that intention. It's not an intention about being happy all the time.
No.
I mean, that would be lovely,
right.
Don't get me wrong. But no, my intention has always been the evolution of my soul. And the world, life, the divine, everything is conspiring in my favor to make that happen.
It was 11:11 when you said that.
Oh, well, there you go. And that's what I feel, and that's one of the things that has gotten me through a lot of things. Yeah. Even as I stumbled and fell and screamed and cried.
Oh, good Lord. Like a 3-year-old I was, throwing a tantrum because I couldn't have a cookie.
I'm going to stomp my feet. Yep.
So, and even identifying with that and recognizing that, right? All of it. It's all good if it's all you. Mm-hmm. So just be all you and then look for the good.
Right. There you go.
Well, it was lovely with you this week. I look forward to seeing you next week.
Yes, yes.
And I hope that as you go through the week and enjoy you had a wonderful Memorial weekend here in, United States. And we're on the cusp of, we just had a lunar eclipse. We've got a solar eclipse coming up in Gemini. And then we're going to have the solstice, summer solstice. So,
and Mercury retrograde.
Right. And actually for us it's summer solstice, but for the southern hemisphere it's winter solstice. So we're just going to say solstice.
Solstice.
And we're at the midpoint of 2021.
I don't even know how that happened.
We made it.
It's flying by.
It is. So until next week, I'm Sonia Lee.
And I'm Piper Lynn. Thank you for joining us. Take care of you.